all around us. Real journalism is about the whys in the house, and that takes more time. So it's great to be able to put stuff out there, but to analyze it and verify it and think it through, that's when you want to put the brakes on and say, okay, have we got the right people? Are our students given the kind of training they need to be able to go out there and make a difference?
And when she says time, that, you know, for a lot of the people who run the media, their accountants, they go time equals money. So that takes more money. We can't afford it. I love her phrase about feeding the goat, especially in this era of 24-hour news. What happens is you end up with hummingbird news, you know? Here's the headline, move on. Here's the headline, move on. There was a fire, there was a crime, there was a car accident. Oh yeah, something happened in Victoria. You know, this is a country, I think, and this is where I think it circles back to us as consumers of the media, as citizens of the country. This is a country that right now we've got a federal government who is promoting, like hell, the War of 1812 at the same time as they're cutting current military benefits. And there's a dichotomy there and a bit of a hypocrisy there, and they get away with it. And they get away with it because we don't have our surrogates, our journalists, asking the critical questions. We've got our shooters showing up saying, well, what do you got to say about this? Great, we'll take it. And we got people who are pushed for time because the deadlines have increased so much. You're pushed for time, that sounds good, I'll take it. Never mind what it says or what it means, it sounds good, I'll take it.
Yeah, and real issues are complicated. You know, in the environment, education, healthcare, the things that we work on. Okay, your turn. Yes, let's go to you. And comments or questions? We have 40 minutes, so we have lots of time.
Right, I'll try to keep this really quick. I would really love to blend the previous talk that I went to, which was all about the muzzling of science that has been much more successful in this current kind of petrostate fascism that we're living under. It also crossed over in terms of the muzzling and kind of controlling of the journalist media field and the muzzling of academia in terms of all kinds of different ways that this system has in perpetuating that. And I totally loved your mentioning of cooperatives, of worker-directed, self-directed examples of moving in. I'm a massive supporter of Paracon, participatory economics, and basically people, progressives, institutions agreeing only to work with other institutions and other worker cooperatives and examples that are based in justice and fairness and in democracy. So I'd really like your comments about that, how, especially when we look at the level of control that's going on under petrostate fascism, of how we can move much more directed towards full democracy on all levels of our economic and social structures.
I'll respond to that point. I think I was really struck during. I actually grew up in Italy, and so to go back there and to do research there was a particular experience for me. I've never seen it as badly off as it is now. I've never seen as much hopelessness as there is now. I was really, really struck by meeting my own generation and feeling like they had absolutely no hope. I've never gotten as many questions from people my own age about what Canada is like and could I possibly immigrate there because there's no future. And I think that if we think that we are somehow immune from this here, we're seriously mistaken. I think that what we need to recognize is that our economic model as a whole over the last 20 or 30 years has been a failure. It has been an utter failure. If we can't guarantee decent jobs to people, if we can't guarantee a living wage to people, if we can't give people the opportunity or the chance to retire at the end of a lifetime of work, then our economic system needs to be rethought. It needs to be rethought. Say what you will about the post-war system. It itself depended on all sorts of forms of exploitation we don't want to go back to, I think. But at least it guaranteed people stable jobs. At least people had the chance or an opportunity to retire. And so when you mention these alternatives, I think part of what we're trying to look at in our research is for forms of collective organization, ways of organizing workplaces that can get us out of this mess, that can provide a model other than, obviously the private sector who wants to follow that as a model. The public sector, a little bit better, right? But still under serious attack.
And still with short-term contracts. I mean, the place across the street is, most of the people working there are on year-by-year contracts.
What was the strike at the CBC, or the lockout at the CBC about?
It's a lockout.
What was the lockout at the CBC about? But over the attempt to further render precarious that workforce. And I think my sense is it was pushed back at that point. But what we're trying to do is to look at models of organizing workplaces which are different than these two models, which I think are failing. And I don't think anyone can argue that they're failing. And to pick up on this, the issue of internships, I think maybe in a unionized workplace, possibly where there's a union that can be vigilant is one thing. But the overwhelming majority of the creative industry is actually not unionized. And so the abuse of internships is rampant. I mean, there's not only are young people going in and doing the cliche running for coffee, etc., but they're actually filling entry-level positions. They're doing entry-level work. And this is not a model. It's not a model. It's not a sustainable model for us to organize our workplaces. It's simply not. And why have internships exploded in the last 20, 30 years? Because they're part and parcel of a way of organizing our economy. They're inextricably related to a kind of a radical free market way of organizing our economy, and one that has failed. It's not even a sustainable model.
But why does the university continue to churn out these traditional journalists when there are opportunities that lie elsewhere? And I think universities should take some initiative to train people differently than they have in the past. For example,
what are you assuming we do?
I'm assuming that nothing has changed in the last 20 years.
Well, you're wrong, because we teach journalism totally differently than we used to. So I'd love you to come up to the university and see what we're trying to do with our students, because they are absolutely brilliant, and we're trying to give them all the tools they need to navigate through a world that has fundamentally changed in the last decade.
So one small example, there was a story about a reporter who went down to the Caribbean and found Carla Hamoka. And she could have pitched this story, investigative journalism, to any of the press and media, but she decided to publish an ebook and have this investigative journalism disseminate on its own through the internet. I'm not sure that a university prepared her to do that. She took the initiative to do it herself.
Hers does. Her course does. I know, because I work with the graduates of her course, and it's incredible. I mean, the skill level, the passion, the energy has always been there, but the skill level that these people come out of that course with give them precisely the tools to do that. To do the investigative journalism, and then to be able to exploit it, to actually market it out there so that you can make a living at it.
Yeah,
Sorry,
and bypass, she bypassed the
speak.
internship altogether, right?
Well, the point I was trying to make earlier is just that we're not allowing our students, we just are not allowing employers to exploit our students, full stop. And if we feel like our students are being exploited, we step in along with the student, and we make a decision about whether they're getting what they need out of it. If our students don't get what they need, the internship stops. And I think that's the way that we can do it. We sort of walk the moral high ground with it. We don't want to fall into providing free labor. That's not what it's about. But it is about giving our students as much opportunity as they need to be able to get out there and be taken seriously in the workplace. And you're right, it's being done differently all the time. These traditional media jobs are slipping away. So people have got to be able to write and contribute in different ways today.
There is one place, though, where traditional media jobs still exist, and they have trouble hiring. But it's not in the major markets. Prince George, Terrace, Medicine Hat, Lethbridge. The amount of churn, I represent members in those stations, the amount of churn in the staffing there, they're begging for good people. They want good people. And they're good jobs. They're good union jobs, a decent, all the things that you talked about, right? A decent job, a fair wage, and, you know. But then again, it's not Vancouver. It's not Toronto. It's not Montreal. It is in some of these smaller markets. And what's also interesting there is that appointment viewing still exists. And the reason for that is because you get out of the Lower Mainland or outside the Okanagan in this province, and you know, you're on the farm, you're in the mill, the whistle blows, you've done your 40, you're home for dinner, the TV goes on, and there's the news. The appointment television still exists. I was in Terrace last week, I'll be there again tomorrow. You know, half the town, you can't get any service. You're done. So nobody there has cell phones. So there is still a dichotomy within, especially this country, between rural and urban.
Yes.
I'm just speaking as a student in communications in my last semester. I know a lot of us right now are having so much difficulty finding a job. It's so hard. But the problem is that I'm so torn because if I say no to an unpaid internship, somebody else for $5,000 employees, right? And if I can't get an unpaid internship, I can't get a paid internship. If I can't get a paid internship, I have no job. I'm stuck working in retail for the rest of my life. So my problem, and you can see my frustration, is right now, like what are we supposed to do? When I go for interviews for internships and they say I'm overqualified for unpaid, or not qualified enough for paid. Where, do you know what I mean? Like, where is the in-between? I mean, the school is great, we learn so much with the program, but where do we go from here? Where do we go?
No.
So, but what is there to, the problem is like, a lot of us, speaking with me,
What kind of work?
we create agencies specifically. I do a lot of writing for free, and a lot of other things like that for free, for information for free. And it's giving me plenty of experience, which is great, but the experience is getting me to a point where now I'm quote unquote overqualified. These employers tell me for unpaid work, we're not qualified enough people. So what happens like in between, like what is there to do when there's so many people getting lined up at this time of time to work?
Can you ask the employer for a next step?
So what I've learned from a lot of because my peers that have become employers in certain agencies is that I need to deep my resume for 10 years.
So when you have interns from the UBC, they go out into a workplace and they're supervised by instructors. It's kind of like being a student teacher. I get all that. But I get the sense from this, I'm sorry, I forget your name.
Valerie.
From Valerie, that companies also offer these so-called internships on their own. And I think that's the difference we're talking about here.
And just to make it a little bit more clear, especially this is Vancouver specific in my own experience. I only know about Vancouver because of the concentration of startups here and where
Yeah.
lack of money and lack
Startups
of
of communications, media, PR
yeah, creative
companies. Yeah.
agencies or design agencies, all of that, because they're startups, we have this higher ground of how money to pay our own people. So we don't know
And I think this is what Anna was talking about specifically, is just this sort of unregulated situation that's happening. We get approached all the time. These, you know, I've started a blog and I want a researcher. Can I have an intern? No. No, you can't. That's not what our, you know, so we're lucky in that way. We have a tiny little program, but what would you suggest?
I'm not sure what I could suggest. I mean, I really feel for you. It's an awful situation that you're facing, and it's one that I think I see all the time. And I'm not sure what I could suggest. I mean, long term, one of the ways one of the reasons why we focused on the development of cooperatives within the creative industries is that they do offer workers the opportunity to work and control their labor conditions and actually literally not have a boss. And so, I mean, this is something that perhaps in the world of startups you might potentially look into.